Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I decided to take a solo trip into the Oregon wilderness to clear my mind. I had always loved hiking, and being out in nature helped me find peace. I picked a remote trail that promised solitude and beautiful scenery. My backpack was loaded with supplies, and I planned to camp for a few days. The first day was uneventful. The forest was thick and green, the air fresh and cool. I found a good spot to set up my tent and made a small fire. As the sun set, I felt a sense of calm. I cooked a simple meal and ate while listening to the sounds of the forest. The next day, I decided to explore further into the woods. I followed a narrow path that seemed rarely used. After a few hours of walking, I noticed signs of human activity, trampled grass, discarded food wrappers. It struck me as odd since this area was supposed to be isolated. As I ventured deeper, I heard voices. They were rough, angry. I crept closer, staying hidden behind trees. Through the foliage, I saw a group of men. They were heavily armed and carrying animal carcasses. Poachers. My heart raced as I realized the danger. These men were breaking the law, and they wouldn't want any witnesses. I started to back away slowly, careful not to make any noise. But then I stepped on a dry twig. It snapped loudly, and the men turned in my direction. I froze, hoping they wouldn't see me, but it was too late. One of them shouted, and they all began moving towards me. Panicking, I ran. My heart pounded in my chest as I crashed through the underbrush. I could hear them behind me, cursing and shouting. They were getting closer. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands on the ground, but I pushed myself up and kept running. I reached a small clearing and hid behind a large rock, trying to catch my breath. I could hear them nearby, their footsteps heavy on the forest floor. I stayed as still as possible, praying they wouldn't find me. But then I heard one of them say, "She's got to be around here somewhere." Fear gripped me. These men were dangerous, and I was alone, deep in the wilderness. I had no way to call for help. I decided to move again, staying low and quiet. I headed towards a creek I remembered passing earlier, thinking the water might help cover my tracks. I reached the creek and waded in, following the water downstream. The cold water numbed my feet, but I didn't stop. I could still hear the men searching behind me. The creek led to a dense part of the forest, and I hoped it would be enough to lose them. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. I was exhausted, cold, and hungry, but I kept moving. The forest grew darker, and the sounds of the night began to surround me. I found a small cave and decided to hide there for the night. I curled up, trying to stay warm and quiet. The next morning, I cautiously emerged from the cave. The forest was silent, and there was no sign of the poachers. I felt a small sense of relief, but knew I wasn't safe yet. I needed to find my way back to my camp and get out of the woods. I retraced my steps, staying alert for any signs of the men. As I got closer to my camp, I noticed smoke rising in the distance. My heart sank. It was coming from the direction of my campsite. I approached cautiously and saw that my tent and supplies were gone, burned to ashes. I was devastated. Everything I had brought was destroyed. I had no food, no shelter, and no way to call for help. I realized I had to keep moving, to find a way out of the forest and reach safety. I tried to stay calm and think clearly. I remembered a ranger station a few miles away. It was my best chance. I began walking, trying to conserve my energy and stay hidden. Every sound made me jump, fearing the poachers might still be out there. I walked for hours, my body aching and tired. Finally, I saw the ranger station in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I didn't let my guard down. I approached carefully, scanning the area for any signs of danger. When I reached the door, I knocked frantically. A ranger opened the door, and I collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I explained what had happened, and he assured me I was safe now. They called the authorities, and soon, the forest was swarming with law enforcement. They found the poachers' camp and arrested them. I stayed at the ranger station for a few days, recovering from the ordeal. The rangers were kind and supportive, helping me through the trauma. I realized how lucky I was to have survived. The wilderness, once my place of peace, had turned into a nightmare. I eventually returned home, but the experience stayed with me. I decided to go camping in the Appalachian Mountains to clear my head. I needed some time away from everything, just me and nature. I packed my gear and drove up to a trail I knew was pretty isolated. It was perfect for what I needed, peace and quiet. The first day was great. I hiked up the trail, enjoying the fresh air and the sounds of the forest. I found a good spot to set up my tent near a small stream. As the sun started to set, I made a fire and cooked some dinner. It was calm and relaxing, just what I wanted. The next day, I decided to explore a bit off the beaten path. I was curious about what was deeper in the woods. After a couple of hours of walking, I noticed something strange. The trees were cut down in a small area, and there were tire tracks leading further into the forest. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it at first. I kept walking, following the tracks out of curiosity. After a while, I saw a clearing up ahead. As I got closer, I realized what it was: a large marijuana plantation. Plants were everywhere, carefully cultivated and hidden from casual hikers. I knew this wasn't something I should be near. Before I could turn back, I heard voices. They were close. I ducked behind a bush and peered through the leaves. I saw two men with guns patrolling the area. My heart started racing. These guys didn't look like they were messing around. I knew I had to get out of there without being seen. I slowly backed away, trying to be as quiet as possible. Every twig snap and rustle of leaves sounded deafening. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them coming after me. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I just wanted to get back to my campsite and pack up. As I moved, I suddenly tripped over a root and fell hard, making a loud noise. I froze, listening. The voices got louder. They heard me. Panic set in. I scrambled to my feet and started running. I could hear them shouting behind me, getting closer. I zigzagged through the trees, trying to lose them. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, but I kept going. I couldn't let them catch me. The thought of what they might do if they did was terrifying. I glanced back and saw one of the men not far behind, his gun ready. I pushed myself harder, desperate to get away. I spotted a rocky area up ahead and ran towards it, hoping to find a place to hide. I squeezed between two large boulders and held my breath. I could hear them searching nearby, their voices angry and tense. I stayed as still as possible, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the voices started to fade. They were moving away, still looking for me but not as close. I waited a bit longer before slowly crawling out from my hiding spot. I needed to get back to my campsite and get out of there. I moved carefully, trying to avoid making any noise. It took a while, but I finally made it back. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I knew I had to leave before they decided to come back this way. With my backpack on, I started down the trail, moving as fast as I could without running. Every sound made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them following me. The fear was overwhelming. I just wanted to get to my car and drive far away from there. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the trailhead. My car was still there. I quickly threw my stuff in the back and got in, locking the doors. My hands were trembling as I started the engine and drove away. I didn't look back. As I drove down the mountain, I couldn't shake the fear. The image of those armed men was burned into my mind. I knew I had been lucky to get away. When I reached a small town, I stopped and called the authorities to report what I had found. They thanked me and said they would investigate. I kept driving until I reached home. The whole experience felt surreal, like a bad dream. But it was real, and it was terrifying. I knew I would think twice before going off the beaten path again. I went camping in the Black Hills of South Dakota for a little peace and quiet. I found a nice spot in a clearing, set up my tent, and got a fire going. The forest was calm, and I felt relaxed, ready for a good night under the stars. As evening turned to night, I heard the distant hum of ATV engines. It was annoying but not too close, so I tried to ignore it. After an hour or so, the noise got louder. I saw the lights of the ATVs approaching my camp. 4 riders pulled up, their engines loud and their laughter even louder. I felt uneasy but tried to stay calm. They stopped near my tent, and one of them, a tall guy with a bandana, got off his ATV and walked over. He looked at me, sizing me up. "Nice spot you got here," he said, smirking. "Thanks," I replied, trying to sound friendly. "Just here for a quiet weekend." The others joined him, their eyes scanning my gear. One of them kicked at my tent peg, laughing. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. They weren't just being noisy, they were looking for trouble. "Got any beer?" another one asked, a big guy with a leather jacket. "No, I didn't bring any," I lied. I had a couple in my cooler, but I didn't want to give them any reason to stick around. "Too bad," the tall guy said. "Guess we'll just hang out here for a while then." He sat on a rock near my fire, making himself at home. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. If I told them to leave, they might get angry. If I did nothing, they might decide to stay and cause more trouble. They talked loudly among themselves, making crude jokes and comments. Every now and then, one of them would glance my way, grinning. I pretended to be busy with my fire, but my mind was racing, trying to think of a way to get them to leave without escalating things. After a while, the big guy got up and started rummaging through my stuff. "Hey!" I shouted, unable to stay quiet any longer. "Leave my gear alone." He looked at me, surprised that I'd spoken up, then laughed. "We're just having a look," he said, throwing my backpack to the ground. I felt anger rising but tried to keep it in check. "Please, just leave my stuff alone," I said, my voice shaking. The tall guy stood up and walked over to me, getting in my face. "You got a problem?" he asked, his eyes cold. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "No problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just want to be left alone." He stared at me for a moment, then turned back to his friends. "Let's go," he said, much to my surprise. "This place is boring anyway." Relief washed over me as they got back on their ATVs. But just as they were about to leave, The big guy grabbed a stick from the fire and threw it at my tent, setting it ablaze. They roared with laughter as they sped off into the night. I quickly grabbed my water bottle and tried to put out the fire, but the tent was already ruined. I managed to stop it from spreading, but my gear was a mess. I felt a mix of relief and anger. They were gone, but they'd left me in a bad spot. I spent the next hour cleaning up the mess and salvaging what I could. The forest was silent again, but the peace I'd felt earlier was shattered. I kept looking around, worried they might come back. I decided it wasn't safe to stay there. I packed up what was left of my gear and started hiking back to my car. The darkness and the sounds of the forest felt more threatening now. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I finally reached my car just before dawn, exhausted and shaken. I threw my stuff in the back and got in, locking the doors. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the ATVs behind me. When I got home, I reported the incident to the local ranger station. They took my statement and promised to look into it. I don't know if they ever found those guys, but I knew I wouldn't be camping alone in the Black Hills again. I was in the Adirondacks for a week, documenting wildlife. My days were spent hiking through dense forests, capturing photos of birds and other animals. The area was beautiful but remote, and I rarely saw other people. On the fourth day, I set up camp near a small clearing. It was a peaceful spot, with a stream nearby and plenty of trees for shade. That evening, as I was reviewing the day's photos, I heard the distant sound of chainsaws. It was odd because I hadn't seen any logging operations in the area. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check it out the next morning. I woke up early and followed the sound, moving cautiously through the forest. After an hour of walking, I came across a group of men cutting down trees. They weren't wearing any uniforms or badges, which struck me as strange. I took a few photos from a distance, not wanting to get too close. As I was about to leave, one of the men spotted me. He yelled something to the others, and they all stopped what they were doing to stare at me. My heart raced as I quickly turned and walked away, trying to look casual. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I made my way back to camp, hoping they would just ignore me. But that evening, I heard footsteps approaching. I peeked out of my tent and saw 3 of the loggers coming towards me. They looked angry. One of them, a tall man with a beard, called out to me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I'm just taking photos of the wildlife," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Show us the camera," he said. Reluctantly, I handed over my camera. They scrolled through the photos, and their expressions darkened when they saw the pictures of them logging. The tall man smashed my camera against a rock, breaking it into pieces. "You shouldn't have taken those," he said, stepping closer. "We don't need any trouble." "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said, backing away. "I'll leave right now." But they didn't seem convinced. They circled around me, blocking my way. Panic set in as I realized I was in serious danger. I had to think fast. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I lied. If something happens to me, no one will find out. The tall man frowned, but he didn't move. Another man, shorter with a scar on his cheek, looked at him and said, "We can't risk it. She's seen too much." My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan. I glanced around, looking for any chance to escape. Then I noticed a narrow path leading into the trees. Without thinking, I bolted towards it, running as fast as I could. They shouted and chased after me. Branches scratched my face and arms as I ran, but I didn't stop. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps pounding on the forest floor. I reached a steep hill and slid down, nearly losing my balance. At the bottom, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. I ran inside and hid behind a pile of rotting wood, trying to catch my breath. The loggers arrived moments later. They spread out, searching the area. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they would hear it. I stayed as still as possible, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like hours, they finally gave up and left. I waited until I was sure they were gone before creeping out of my hiding spot. My body ached from the tension and the scrapes from my frantic run. I made my way back to camp, grabbed what little gear I could carry, and set off in the opposite direction of the loggers. I walked through the night, not stopping until I reached a small town the next morning. I went straight to the local authorities and reported what had happened. They seemed skeptical at first but agreed to investigate. I stayed in town for a few days, recovering from the ordeal and hoping for news. A few days later, I heard that the authorities had found the illegal logging operation and shut it down. The men were arrested, and I was asked to testify. It was a terrifying experience, but I was relieved that justice was served. I've since returned to my wildlife photography, but I'm much more cautious now. I decided to take a solo trip to the Ozarks for some peace and quiet. I needed a break from the city, from work, from everything. I packed light, just a tent, some food, and my camera. I drove deep into the woods, far away from any towns or people, and found a spot to set up camp. It was beautiful, so quiet I could hear the wind in the trees and the rustle of animals in the underbrush. The first day was perfect. I hiked, took photos, and enjoyed the solitude. As evening came, I built a small fire and cooked dinner. The night was dark, with only the stars and my fire for light. I felt a little uneasy, but I told myself it was just because I wasn't used to being alone in the woods. The next morning, I decided to explore further. I packed some water and snacks and set off on a trail that seemed to go deeper into the forest. After a couple of hours, I came across a small, overgrown path. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but curiosity got the better of me, and I followed it. The path led to a clearing with an old, run-down cabin. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, the wood weathered and gray. But there was something about it that didn't feel right. I thought about turning back, but my curiosity was stronger. I walked closer, trying to get a better look. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise from behind the cabin. I froze, my heart pounding. A man emerged from the trees, dirty and disheveled. He looked like he hadn't seen another person in years. His eyes were wild, and he was holding a shotgun. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice rough and angry. I was just hiking," I stammered, raising my hands. "I didn't mean to intrude." "This is my land," he said, stepping closer. "You have no right to be here." "I'm sorry," I said, backing away. "I'll leave now." But he didn't seem to hear me. He raised the shotgun, pointing it directly at me. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. I heard a shot, the sound echoing through the trees. I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees all looking the same. I could still hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, shouting. I stumbled, falling to the ground. My ankle throbbed, but I forced myself to get up and keep moving. I found a small ravine and slid down into it, hiding behind a large rock. I held my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I heard him above, cursing and shouting. He fired the shotgun again, the sound deafening. I pressed myself against the rock, praying he wouldn't find me. After what felt like hours, the noise stopped. I waited, not daring to move. When I was sure he was gone, I climbed out of the ravine and started back the way I had come. I was limping, my ankle swollen and painful, but I didn't stop. I had to get back to my camp, to my car. It took me hours to find my way back. The sun was setting by the time I reached my campsite. I grabbed my things, threw them in the car, and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in civilization. I went to the nearest police station and told them what had happened. They took my statement and said they would investigate, but I don't know if they ever found him. I still think about that day, about how close I came to not making it out of those woods. Now, whenever I go hiking, I make sure to stay on marked trails and never go alone. I decided to camp alone in the Smoky Mountains. I wanted some time away from everything, a break from the noise and the stress. I picked a spot deep in the forest, far from any trails or other campers. It was perfect, just me and nature. The first night was peaceful. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and cooked dinner. The sounds of the forest were comforting, and I fell asleep easily. The next morning, I woke up early, ready to explore. I hiked all day, taking in the beauty of the mountains, the fresh air, and the solitude. When I returned to my campsite, something felt off. My tent was unzipped, and my supplies were scattered. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, but then I noticed footprints. Human footprints. My heart started to race. I checked my belongings and found that some food and a flashlight were missing. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just a lost hiker who needed some supplies. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to stay alert and keep my campfire going all night. As darkness fell, the forest seemed different. Every rustle and snap of a twig made me jump. Around midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming closer. I cracked my flashlight and shone it towards the sound. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I sat there, gripping the flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest. Minutes passed, then hours, but the footsteps didn't return. The next day, I decided to pack up and leave. As I gathered my things, I felt eyes on me. I looked around, but saw no one. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I started hiking back towards my car, keeping a fast pace. After a few hours, I realized I was lost. I had been so distracted by the feeling of being watched that I must have taken a wrong turn. Panic set in. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. As the sun began to set, I knew I had to set up camp again. I found a small clearing and quickly pitched my tent. I made a small fire and sat close to it, trying to stay calm. As night fell, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. I kept my flashlight and a small knife close by, ready for anything. Around midnight, the footsteps returned. This time, they were closer, circling my campsite. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, catching a glimpse of movement. Someone was out there, watching me. I shouted, telling them to leave me alone, but there was no response. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my knife and flashlight and stepped out of my tent. The firelight cast eerie shadows, making it hard to see. I scanned the darkness, my heart racing. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. A man, dressed in dirty clothes, with a wild look in his eyes. He stared at me, not moving. I shouted again, telling him to leave, but he just stood there, watching. I backed towards my tent, keeping the flashlight on him. He took a step forward, then another. I knew I had to act. I grabbed a burning stick from the fire and waved it at him. He stopped, his eyes widening. For a moment, we stood there, locked in a standoff. Then he turned and ran into the darkness. I stood there, shaking, not sure what to do. I knew I couldn't stay there. I packed up my things as quickly as I could and started hiking, not caring which direction, just needing to get away. I walked through the night, not stopping until the first light of dawn. Exhausted, I finally found a trail and followed it. Hours later, I stumbled upon a ranger station. I told them everything. They took my report and promised to investigate. I left the mountains that day, vowing never to camp alone again. The feeling of being watched still haunts me. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I'm just grateful I made it out alive. I decided to take a solo trip to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. I needed some time alone, away from everything. I heard it was beautiful and quiet, the perfect place to clear my mind. I loaded up my canoe, packed my gear, and paddled out deep into the wilderness. The first few days were great. I didn't see another soul, just me and the water and the trees. I set up camp on a little island, made a fire, and enjoyed the solitude. I spent my days fishing and exploring, feeling more relaxed than I had in years. On the fourth day, I noticed something strange. As I was paddling back to my camp, I saw another canoe in the distance. It was unusual because I hadn't seen anyone else around. The canoe was heading towards a part of the shore I hadn't explored yet. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured someone else was enjoying the peace and quiet. That night, I heard noises. Voices, low and serious, tarrying over the water. I got up and looked around, but couldn't see anything in the dark. It made me uneasy, but I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just other campers. Still, I kept my knife close, just in case. The next day, I decided to check out where I saw the canoe heading. It was a bit of a paddle, but I was curious. As I got closer, I saw signs of activity. Footprints in the mud, discarded food wrappers, and the remains of a fire. It looked like someone had been camping there recently. As I was looking around, I heard the voices again. They were closer this time. I quickly hid behind some bushes and watched as 3 men came into view. They were carrying large bags and talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they didn't look like your average campers. I waited until they were out of sight before sneaking back to my canoe. My heart was pounding. Something about those men didn't sit right with me. I paddled back to my camp as quickly as I could, trying to keep a low profile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, every snap of a twig making me jump. Around midnight, I saw a light moving through the trees on the shore. It was them. They were searching for something or someone. Panic set in. What if they found me? I stayed as quiet as possible, barely daring to breathe. The light moved closer, then further away. Eventually, it disappeared. I didn't sleep at all, just sat there clutching my knife, waiting for dawn. The next morning, I decided I needed to leave. This wasn't the peaceful trip I'd planned. I packed up my gear and got ready to go. As I was loading my canoe, I saw them again, watching from the shore. They knew I was there. I pushed off quickly and started paddling away, but they jumped into their canoe and followed. My mind raced. Why were they after me? What did they want? I paddled as hard as I could, but they were gaining on me. I spotted a narrow channel and headed for it, hoping to lose them in the twists and turns. The channel was shallow and filled with rocks, making it difficult to navigate. I scraped the bottom of my canoe several times, but I couldn't slow down. I could hear them behind me, their voices angry and close. I pushed harder, my arms burning with the effort. Finally, I saw a small inlet and made for it. I beached my canoe and ran into the woods, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I hid in the underbrush, trying to control my breathing. They were close now, shouting and cursing. I stayed perfectly still, praying they wouldn't find me. After what felt like hours, their voices started to fade. I waited until I was sure they were gone before moving. I made my way through the woods, keeping off the main paths. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. Eventually, I found a small ranger station. I stumbled in, exhausted and scared. The ranger looked at me, shocked at my appearance. I told him everything. He called for backup, and soon the place was swarming with law enforcement. They took my statement and went out looking for the men. I stayed at the station, too shaken to do anything else. They found signs of the men, evidence of their drug operation, but the men themselves had disappeared. The officers told me I was lucky to be alive. They said the Boundary Waters were known for this kind of activity, though it rarely reached the tourists. I left Minnesota the next day, vowing never to return. The peace I'd sought turned into a nightmare I couldn't forget. We decided to take a family camping trip to the Redwoods in California. It was just me, my wife, and our 2 kids. We thought it would be a good way to spend some quality time together, away from the city and all the noise. The first couple of days were perfect. We hiked, roasted marshmallows, and told stories around the campfire. The kids loved it. The trees were massive, and everything felt peaceful. But on the 3rd night, things started to get strange. It was around midnight when I first heard the noises. At first, I thought it was just animals, maybe a raccoon or a deer. But then I heard voices. Low, whispering voices. I got out of the tent to take a look. I couldn't see anything, but the feeling that someone was watching us was overwhelming. The next morning, I found footprints around our campsite. They were too big to be from any of us. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just other campers passing through. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I kept the fire going longer than usual. I wanted to make sure I could see if anyone approached. Around 2 a.m., I heard the voices again, closer this time. I quietly got out of the tent and grabbed the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but I still couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, I heard a rustling behind me. I spun around, and there they were. 3 men, dirty and wild-eyed, standing just outside the circle of light. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew right away these weren't ordinary campers. One of them stepped forward and smiled. "Nice night, isn't it?" he said, but there was nothing friendly about his tone. I didn't know what to do. My wife and kids were still sleeping, and I didn't want to scare them, but I knew I had to do something. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just looking for a place to stay," the man replied. "Mind if we join you?" I knew this wasn't a request. I shook my head. "I think it's best if you move along." We're just here with our kids, trying to have a quiet trip. The man's smile faded. Oh, we insist, he said, stepping closer. The other two men spread out, flanking me. I glanced back at the tent. My wife was peeking out, her eyes wide with fear. I knew I had to protect them. You need to leave, now, I said, louder this time. The man's face twisted in anger. I don't think you understand, he said. We're not going anywhere. One of the other men lunged at me, but I managed to dodge and push him away. Wake up the kids and get to the car. I shouted to my wife. She scrambled to wake the kids while I tried to hold off the men. They were stronger than me, and I could feel my strength fading. But I had to buy them time. I heard my wife scream as she bundled the kids into the car. I took a punch to the gut and doubled over, but I didn't let go of my flashlight. I swung it wildly, hitting one of the men in the face. He fell back, cursing. Go! Go! I yelled, stumbling towards the car. The men were right behind me. I could hear their footsteps, their heavy breathing. We managed to get into the car and lock the doors just as they reached us. My wife fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. The men pounded on the windows, shouting and threatening us. Finally, the engine roared to life. We sped out of the campsite, the men chasing us for a few yards before giving up. My wife drove as fast as she could, not stopping until we reached a small town several miles away. We went straight to the police. They took our statement and told us there had been reports of escaped convicts in the area. They assured us they would search the woods, but I knew I'd never feel safe camping again. That night, in the safety of a motel room, I held my family close. We were lucky to be alive. It was supposed to be a routine research trip, just me and my equipment trekking through the rugged terrain of the Rocky Mountains. I had always been fascinated by the untouched wilderness, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. Little did I know, this trip would lead me into a nightmare. The first few days were peaceful. I mapped out the area, collected samples, and documented the flora and fauna. The silence of the mountains was soothing, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds or rustle of leaves. But on the third night, things took a dark turn. I was sitting by my campfire, reviewing my notes when I heard distant noises echoing through the trees. At first, I thought it might be wildlife or the wind, but as the sounds grew louder, I realized it was something else entirely. Low voices, gruff and urgent. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the source of the noise. Through the dense foliage, I spotted them, men in heavy boots, their faces hidden under dirt-streaked hats. They were huddled around makeshift mining equipment, digging into the earth with purpose. My heart raced as I realized what I had stumbled upon, illegal mining operations in the heart of the Rockies. I knew I had to document this, to report it to the authorities. But before I could retreat to safety, a twig snapped under my foot. The men turned as one, their eyes locking onto me with suspicion and hostility. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. They muttered to each other, their voices carrying a dangerous edge. I was exposed, caught red-handed in their secret operation. One of them stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice rough like gravel. I tried to explain that I was conducting research, that I hadn't meant to intrude. But my words fell on deaf ears. They saw me as a threat, someone who could expose their illegal activities to the authorities. Fear gripped me as I realized the danger I was in. Another man, larger and more intimidating, took a step closer. "She's seen too much," he muttered to the others. "We can't let her leave." Panic surged through me as they advanced, their intentions clear. I turned and ran, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Branches clawed at my clothes, roots threatened to trip me, but I pushed forward, driven by sheer terror. Behind me, I could hear their heavy footsteps, closing in. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. Desperate, I veered off the trail, plunging into the dense underbrush. Twigs snapped underfoot, leaves whipped against my face, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, I stumbled into a small clearing and collapsed behind a fallen tree. I held my breath, listening for any sign of pursuit. Minutes passed like hours, but the forest remained eerily silent. Carefully, I peeked out from my hiding spot. There was no sign of the men, but I knew I couldn't stay there indefinitely. I had to find a way out, back to civilization where I could call for help. Using my compass and what little daylight remained, I navigated through the unfamiliar terrain. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. Fear gnawed at me, urging me to move faster, to get away from the danger lurking in the shadows. Hours passed before I finally emerged onto a familiar trail. Relief flooded through me, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I pushed on, ignoring the ache in my muscles and the fatigue weighing down on me. At long last, I reached the ranger station where I had parked my car. I practically threw myself inside, locking the doors behind me. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, dialing emergency services. When the authorities arrived, I led them back to the site of the illegal mining operation. But by then, the men were long gone, leaving behind only traces of their activities. The authorities assured me they would investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. For weeks afterward, I lived in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that those men would find me again. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the nightmare I had escaped. The tranquility of the Rockies had been shattered, replaced by a lingering sense of dread. I never returned to those mountains, haunted by the memories of that terrifying encounter. The beauty of the wilderness had been tainted by the darkness lurking beneath its surface. I've always loved photography, especially capturing the raw beauty of nature. So when I got the chance to explore the Everglades, I was ecstatic. It was just me, my camera, and the endless expanse of marshes and mangroves stretching out before me. I spent the day snapping photos of everything, the wildlife, the vegetation, the serene waters reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. The Everglades were breathtakingly beautiful, a photographer's paradise. As dusk settled in, I decided to find a good spot for some nighttime shots. I ventured deeper into the wilderness, following a narrow trail that wound through the dense foliage. The air was thick with the sounds of chirping insects and the occasional splash of water. That's when I saw them, figures moving in the shadows, far off the beaten path. At first, I thought they were just other explorers like me, perhaps fellow photographers. But as I zoomed in with my camera lens, I realized they were up to something else entirely. The group seemed tense, huddled around large crates and duffel bags. They weren't carrying tripods or cameras. Instead, they had tools and equipment that looked suspiciously out of place in the tranquil Everglades. Curiosity got the better of me, and I snapped a few shots, intending to document what I was witnessing. But in my excitement, I must have made a noise, a twig snapping underfoot, perhaps. Suddenly, the group froze, heads snapping in my direction. I knew immediately that I had been spotted. Panic surged through me as I turned and bolted back down the trail. Adrenaline fueled my legs as I ran, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind me. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me up, but I didn't dare slow down. Through the darkness, I could hear their voices, harsh whispers, urging each other to catch me. Fear clawed at my chest, urging me to run faster, to escape the men who were now hunting me through the Everglades. I took sharp turns, hoping to lose them in the labyrinthine paths of the swamp. But they were relentless, their footsteps growing closer with every passing second. I glanced back once and saw their silhouettes against the dim moonlight, closing in. With a surge of desperation, I veered off the trail, crashing through the thick underbrush. Thorns tore at my clothes, mud sucked at my shoes, but I kept pushing forward, driven by sheer terror. I had to get away, had to find somewhere safe to hide until help arrived. Heart pounding, breath ragged, I stumbled upon a small clearing. It offered no shelter, but I didn't dare stop. I kept moving, listening for any sign of my pursuers. The night was silent except for the sounds of the swamp, insects buzzing, water lapping against the reeds. I couldn't risk staying in the open. Pushing through the fear, I plunged into the murky waters of a shallow creek, wading upstream to throw off my scent. The cold water numbed my legs, but I pressed on, driven by the fear of being caught by the men chasing me. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged onto a muddy bank and collapsed behind a fallen tree. I strained to listen for any sounds of pursuit, but the only thing I heard was the pounding of my own heart. Had I managed to evade them, or were they closing in? Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. I dared not move, not even to check my surroundings. The adrenaline that had fueled my flight now left me trembling and exhausted. But I knew I couldn't rest yet. I had to find my way out of the Everglades, back to safety. Carefully, cautiously, I crept along the edge of the creek, using the moonlight to guide me. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, every splash of water made my heart skip a beat. I was alone, vulnerable, hunted. Finally, I stumbled upon a familiar trail marker. Relief flooded through me, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down yet. I pushed forward, ignoring the ache in my muscles and the exhaustion weighing me down. When I reached the edge of the Everglades, I practically collapsed onto solid ground. Tears stung my eyes as I fumbled for my phone, dialing emergency services. The authorities arrived swiftly, and I led them back to where I had last seen the smugglers. But by then, the group was gone, leaving behind only their makeshift camp and the crates that hinted at their illicit activities. The authorities assured me they would investigate, but the terror of that night lingered long after I left the Everglades. I never went back to photograph the Everglades again. We'd been planning the camping trip for months. Me, Josh, Emily, and Sarah. The Catskills sounded perfect, peaceful, and away from everything. We loaded up the car and set off early Friday morning, excited for a weekend of hiking and campfires. The drive was long but beautiful, winding roads through dense forests. We reached our campsite in the late afternoon, and the sun was just starting to set behind the trees. Setting up camp was fun. Josh struggled with the tent while Emily and Sarah laughed and tried to help. I started a fire, and soon we had everything ready. As the sky darkened, we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. It felt great to be out there, away from the noise of the city. Around midnight, we heard a rustling in the bushes. We all froze, staring into the darkness. Josh grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the noise. A raccoon darted out, and we all laughed, relieved it wasn't anything worse. We decided to call it a night and headed into our tents. I fell asleep almost instantly, tired from the day's activities. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud snap. It sounded like a branch breaking, but closer. I sat up, listening. There it was again, followed by a low, grumbling voice. My heart started to race. I unzipped the tent quietly and peeked outside. In the dim moonlight, I saw a shadow moving near the edge of our campsite. It looked like a man. I crawled out of the tent, trying not to make a sound. Josh stirred and woke up, whispering, "What's going on?" I motioned for him to be quiet and pointed towards the shadow. We both watched as the figure moved closer, now clearly a man with a long beard and wild hair. He was muttering to himself, looking around like he was searching for something. Josh and I stayed low, hoping he wouldn't see us. The man walked around the campsite, poking at our gear and mumbling. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but he sounded angry. After a few minutes, he walked off into the woods. We waited, tense, until we were sure he was gone. Then we quietly woke Emily and Sarah, explaining what we saw. None of us could sleep after that. We sat by the fire, keeping it low, and talked about what to do. Emily suggested packing up and leaving, but it was pitch dark, and navigating the trails would be dangerous. We decided to stay put and leave at first light. We took turns keeping watch, but the night passed without any more incidents. At dawn, we quickly packed up our things and started hiking back to the car. The forest felt different, more menacing. Every sound made us jump. We were about halfway back when Sarah screamed. We turned to see her foot caught in a snare, a simple but painful trap that yanked her leg up into the air. Josh and I rushed to free her, while Emily kept watch. We managed to get Sarah free, but she was hurt and couldn't walk properly. Josh and I took turns supporting her as we continued. Our pace was slow, and we were all on edge. We hadn't gone much further when we found another trap, this one a pit covered with leaves and branches. It was clear now that someone was trying to catch us. Panic set in. We knew we had to move faster, but Sarah was slowing us down. Emily found a sturdy branch, and we used it as a makeshift crutch for her. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest was too quiet, the birds and animals seemingly gone. Then we heard it, the same grumbling voice from the night before, closer this time. We ducked behind a large rock, peering out to see the bearded man again. He was walking along the trail, inspecting his traps. He looked furious, kicking at the dirt and shouting to himself. We waited until he moved past us before continuing. Our progress was slow, and every step felt like a gamble. We were constantly scanning for more traps and listening for the man. After what felt like hours, we finally reached the edge of the forest and saw the car. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. The man was there, standing by the car, his eyes wild and angry. We froze, unsure of what to do. He saw us and started shouting, accusing us of trying to steal from him. Josh tried to reason with him, but the man wasn't listening. He pulled out a knife and started towards us. We backed away, trying to think of a way out. Just then, a ranger's truck appeared on the road. The man hesitated, giving us a chance to run. The ranger saw what was happening and stopped, jumping out of his truck with his hand on his gun. He shouted for the man to drop the knife. The man looked at us, then back at the ranger, before finally dropping the knife and raising his hands. The ranger called for backup and took the man into custody. We explained what had happened, and he assured us we were safe now. It turned out the man was a survivalist who had been living in the woods for years, paranoid and convinced everyone was out to get him. He'd set traps to protect his territory, not realizing how dangerous they were. We drove back to the city in silence, still shaken from the ordeal. The trip that was supposed to be a fun getaway had turned into a nightmare. I always wanted to test my survival skills in the wild, so I planned a solo trip to the Alaskan wilderness. I was excited and a bit nervous. I had my gear packed, a tent, a rifle, enough food for a week, and all the essentials. The flight to Anchorage was smooth, and I rented a small plane to take me to a remote area. The pilot dropped me off and promised to pick me up in a week. The place was beautiful, endless trees, mountains, and a river nearby. It felt like I was the only person on Earth. The first day went well. I set up my camp near the river, built a fire, and cooked dinner. The silence was incredible, just the sound of the river and the wind in the trees. I felt at peace. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to start exploring. I hiked through the forest, enjoying the solitude and the challenge of navigating without any trails. I saw some deer and a few birds, but no signs of other people. It was perfect. By the third day, I had settled into a routine. I would hike during the day, fish by the river in the afternoon, and relax by the fire at night. It was everything I had hoped for. But that evening, as I was cleaning a fish, I noticed something strange. There were footprints near the river, not mine. They were fresh, maybe a few hours old. I stood there, staring at them, my mind racing. Who else could be out here? I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a hunter or another camper. But as I looked around, I didn't see any signs of another camp. The footprints led away from the river and disappeared into the forest. I decided not to think too much about it and went back to my camp. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept listening for any sound, any sign that I wasn't alone. The next day, I found more footprints closer to my camp. They were definitely following me. I started to feel uneasy. I spent most of the day circling my camp, trying to see if I could spot anyone. I didn't see anything, but I felt like I was being watched. I kept my rifle close and built the fire up higher that night, hoping it would keep whoever it was away. I barely slept, every little noise making me jump. At dawn, I decided to hike to a nearby hill where I could get a better view of the area. Maybe I could see who was following me. The hike was tough, but I made it to the top. I scanned the area with my binoculars and my heart skipped a beat. There was a man, about half a mile away, watching my camp through his own binoculars. He looked rough, like he'd been out here a long time. I ducked down, hoping he hadn't seen me. I didn't know what to do. He was too far to confront, but too close to ignore. I stayed on the hill for a while, trying to think. The man didn't move. He just kept watching my camp. Finally, I decided to head back, staying off the main path to avoid being seen. When I got back to my camp, I packed up my gear quickly. I had to get out of there. I started hiking back towards the spot where the plane would pick me up, but I kept off the main trails. I moved quickly, trying to put as much distance between me and that man as possible. I hiked all day and into the night, only stopping when I couldn't go any further. I found a hidden spot to set up a makeshift camp, not bothering with a fire. I ate some cold food and kept my rifle close. I woke up to a noise, a twig snapping. I froze, listening. The sound came again, closer. I grabbed my rifle and slowly peeked out of my tent. The man was there, about 20 feet away, creeping towards me. Our eyes met, and he froze. I didn't hesitate. I shouted at him to stop, raising my rifle. He stood still, hands up, a wild look in his eyes. He started talking fast, saying he was lost, that he needed help. But something about his story didn't add up. He looked more dangerous than lost. I told him to back away, keeping my rifle trained on him. He kept talking, trying to get closer. I fired a warning shot into the ground. He finally backed off, cursing at me. As soon as he was out of sight, I packed up again and started moving. I didn't stop until I reached the pickup spot. I found a good spot to hide and waited, hoping the plane would come early. I spent the next day hidden, listening for any sign of a man. Every sound made my heart race. Finally, I heard the plane. I jumped out, waving my arms. The pilot saw me and landed. I ran to the plane, throwing my gear inside. As we took off, I looked back, half expecting to see the man burst out of the trees. But there was nothing. Just the empty wilderness. Back in Anchorage, I told the authorities about the man. They took my statement but didn't seem too concerned. People go missing in the wilderness all the time, they said. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something terrible. I was training for an ultramarathon in the Colorado Rockies, a dream I had for years. The race was a month away, so I decided to do a long run on a remote trail. I'd done my research, packed all the essentials, and felt ready for anything. The weather was perfect that morning, crisp and clear, with the scent of pine in the air. I started my run early, the sun just beginning to rise. The first few hours were blissful. The trail was challenging but beautiful, winding through dense forests and up rocky slopes. I felt strong, my legs moving effortlessly as I soaked in the solitude. I was about 20 miles in when things started to go wrong. I took a wrong turn at a fork in the trail, not realizing my mistake until much later. By the time I figured out I was lost, I had already covered a lot of ground. My GPS watch had lost signal, and my phone had no reception. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. The trees loomed tall and dense, blocking out the sun and making it hard to keep track of time. Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had food, water, and a map. I could find my way back. I kept moving, hoping to find a familiar landmark. After another hour of running, I stumbled upon a small clearing. There were several tents set up and a campfire smoldering in the center. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. I approached the camp, calling out to see if anyone was around. 3 men emerged from one of the tents. They looked rough, with unkempt beards and clothes that had seen better days. Their eyes were cold and assessing as they looked me over. I explained that I was lost and asked if they could help me find the trail. They exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. He said they could help, but it was too late to go back now. I should stay the night and leave in the morning. Something about his tone set off alarm bells in my head. I thanked them but insisted I needed to leave right away. He didn't like that. His expression hardened, and he told me it wasn't a request. I realized I was in trouble. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I wouldn't get far. I needed a plan. I tried to play along, pretending to agree to stay, hoping to find a way out when they weren't watching. They offered me food and water, which I accepted, even though I wasn't hungry. I needed to keep up appearances. As night fell, they started drinking. Their behavior grew more erratic, their laughter louder and more forced. I pretended to join in, laughing at their jokes and trying to stay on their good side. But inside, I was terrified. I needed to escape before things got worse. I waited until they were deep into their drinking, their movements slower and their attention elsewhere. I excused myself, saying I needed to use the bathroom, and slipped into the darkness. My heart pounded as I crept away from the camp, trying to move silently. I had no idea where I was going, but I had to put distance between us. Suddenly, I heard a shout. They had noticed I was gone. I broke into a run, branches slashing at my face and arms as I plunged through the forest. Behind me, I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, yelling at each other to spread out. They were close, too close. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning and my legs screaming in protest. I stumbled upon a small cave and ducked inside, pressing myself against the cold stone wall. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity. I could hear them moving through the forest, their voices getting fainter. Finally, the forest fell silent. I waited, afraid to move. My mind raced with plans and possibilities. I couldn't stay here forever. I needed to find the trail and get back to safety. When I felt it was safe, I crept out of the cave and continued moving. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. As dawn broke, I found a stream and followed it, hoping it would lead me to civilization. Hours passed, and just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled onto a familiar trail. Relief and exhaustion washed over me. I followed the trail, my steps unsteady but determined. Finally, I saw a group of hikers coming towards me. I waved them down, my voice hoarse as I explained what had happened. They called the authorities, and soon I was safe, surrounded by park rangers and rescue workers. I told them everything about the men and their camp. A search was launched, but they never found the men or their camp. I was deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, studying rare plants for my research project. I'd been out there for weeks, camping and hiking through dense woods. The isolation was peaceful, the only sounds being birds and the rustling of leaves. I loved it out there, feeling like I was the only person in the world. One morning, I set off to a new area I hadn't explored yet. My map showed it as a dense patch of forest, likely to have the rare species I was looking for. It was a long hike, but I didn't mind. The forest was beautiful, with towering trees and patches of wildflowers. Hours passed as I carefully collected samples and took notes. As the day wore on, I noticed signs of recent human activity. Fresh tire tracks and broken branches made me uneasy. I hadn't seen anyone else for days and wasn't expecting company. I pushed on, hoping it was just some off-roaders passing through. I was wrong. I heard the sound of chainsaws in the distance, cutting through the silence. My heart sank. Illegal loggers were the last thing I wanted to encounter. I knew they could be dangerous, not wanting anyone to interfere with their operations. I decided to avoid them and take a longer route back to my camp. But fate wasn't on my side. I stumbled upon a clearing where several men were cutting down trees. They spotted me before I could back away. I froze, trying to think of what to say. One of the men, a big guy with a scar across his face, shouted at me to stop. The others turned to look, their expressions hostile. He approached me, asking who I was and what I was doing there. I tried to explain that I was just a botanist, studying plants for my research. But he didn't believe me. He accused me of being a government agent, there to spy on them and shut down their operation. I tried to deny it, but he wasn't listening. The other men surrounded me, their eyes filled with suspicion and anger. I could feel the tension in the air, and I knew I was in serious trouble. They started arguing about what to do with me. Some wanted to let me go, but others thought I'd report them. The scar-faced guy seemed to be in charge, and he wasn't convinced by my pleas. They decided to take me to their camp deeper in the forest. They tied my hands and marched me through the woods, my mind racing with fear. I knew I had to find a way to escape, but I didn't know how. They were armed with axes and chainsaws, and I had nothing. At their camp, They threw me into a small, makeshift hut and locked the door. I could hear them talking outside, discussing what to do with me. My heart pounded as I listened, trying to make out their plans. They were worried I'd bring the authorities down on them, and some were suggesting getting rid of me for good. I had to act fast. I looked around the hut for anything I could use to free myself. My hands were tied, but not too tightly. I managed to wriggle one hand free and untie the ropes. There was a small window at the back of the hut, just big enough for me to squeeze through. I climbed out, trying to be as quiet as possible. The forest was dark, the sun having set while I was their prisoner. I moved slowly, avoiding the campfire's light and staying in the shadows. I could hear them laughing and talking, unaware that I was escaping. My heart raced as I crept away, every twig snapping underfoot making me flinch. I knew I couldn't go back to my camp. They'd find me there. I needed to get to the nearest town and find help. I remembered the direction I came from and started moving as quickly as I could through the dense forest. My legs ached, and I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. Hours passed, and I kept moving, my fear driving me forward. I stumbled and fell several times, but I got back up and kept going. The forest seemed endless, and I felt like I was running in circles. But then I saw lights in the distance, the faint glow of a town. Relief washed over me as I staggered towards the lights. I burst out of the forest onto a road, waving frantically at the first car I saw. The driver stopped, and I explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a rush. They took me to the local sheriff's office, where I finally felt safe. I told the authorities everything, and they organized a search party to find the loggers. I never found out what happened to them, but I was just glad to be alive. My research project was put on hold, and I left the Pacific Northwest, the memory of that terrifying encounter forever etched in my mind. The forest, once a place of peace and solitude, now held a darker meaning for me. Last summer, my friends and I decided to go camping in the Utah desert. It was supposed to be a getaway from our busy lives. Just 4 of us, Tom, Sarah, Jake, and me. We packed our tents, food, and some gear, and drove out to a remote spot far from any town. The landscape was beautiful, with red rocks and wide open skies. It felt like we had the whole world to ourselves. We set up camp near a small canyon. There was a sense of peace there, just the wind and the distant sound of birds. As night fell, we built a fire and sat around it, talking and laughing. The stars were so bright, and everything seemed perfect. After a while, we turned in for the night, excited for the hike we planned for the next day. Around midnight, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first, just a feeling that something was off. Then I heard it, voices. Low and urgent, coming from somewhere nearby. I unzipped my tent quietly and peered out. I could see shadows moving in the distance, too far to make out clearly but close enough to worry me. I nudged Tom awake and pointed. His eyes widened, and he whispered that we should wake the others. We huddled together, trying to figure out what to do. The voices grew louder, and we could see flashlights moving closer. Sarah suggested we stay quiet and hope they pass by, but Jake was scared and wanted to pack up and leave immediately. Before we could decide, the men were upon us. There were 6 of them, all armed. They surrounded our campsite, their flashlights blinding us. One of them, a tall man with a grizzled beard, stepped forward and demanded to know what we were doing there. We explained we were just camping, that we didn't mean any harm. He stared at us for a long moment, then told us to pack up and leave, now. We scrambled to obey, packing up our gear as fast as we could. The men watched us closely, their guns at the ready. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip my backpack. The tension was suffocating. Finally, we were ready, and the bearded man told us to follow him. They led us through the dark desert, away from our camp. My mind raced with fear. Who were these men? Why were they out here? We walked for what felt like hours until we came to a large fence with a gate. Beyond it, I could see the faint outline of buildings. The bearded man told us this was private property and we had trespassed. He said they were part of a religious community and they didn't like outsiders. I tried to explain again that we didn't know, that we were just camping, but he cut me off. He said we had seen too much and couldn't leave until they decided what to do with us. My stomach dropped. This was worse than I had imagined. They took us inside the compound, to a small building that looked like a storage shed. They locked us inside, saying they would deal with us in the morning. The room was dark and cold, and we huddled together, trying to stay calm. Sarah was crying, and Jake kept muttering that we were going to die. None of us slept that night. We kept listening for any sound outside, our minds filled with terror. As the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, we heard footsteps. The door creaked open, and the bearded man entered, followed by two others. He said they had decided to let us go, but warned us never to return. He said if we told anyone about this place, they would find us and kill us. His eyes were cold and dead as he spoke, and I believed him. They blindfolded us and drove us back to our car, miles away from where we had camped. They left us there, in the middle of nowhere, and drove off without another word. We stood there, stunned, until the dust from their vehicle settled. Then we piled into the car and drove as fast as we could back to civilization. None of us spoke much during the drive. We were too shaken. When we got home, we agreed never to talk about what happened. We were scared of what those men might do if they found out we had. I still have nightmares about that night, about those cold eyes and the feeling of being utterly helpless. I don't know who those men were or what they were protecting, and I don't want to find out. We never went camping again. Last fall, I went on a solo retreat in the woods of Maine. I needed a break from work and life in general. I found this cabin online, secluded and surrounded by trees. It sounded perfect. I packed my things and drove up there, excited to have some peace and quiet. The first few days were great. I hiked, read books, and just enjoyed being away from everything. The air was crisp, and the colors of the leaves were beautiful. It felt like I was in another world. I didn't see anyone else around, which was exactly what I wanted. One morning, I decided to take a longer hike. I packed some snacks and water and headed out. I walked for hours, losing myself in the beauty of the forest. As the sun started to set, I realized I should head back. I took a different path, hoping it would lead me back to the cabin faster. That's when I stumbled upon them. At first, I heard voices and the sound of something heavy being dragged. I crept closer, staying hidden behind the trees. I saw a group of men, maybe 5 or 6, dressed in camouflage. They were dragging a deer, but something looked off. They were using these weird traps, brutal and illegal from what I could tell. I stepped on a twig, and the sound was loud in the quiet woods. One of the men looked up and saw me. My heart pounded as I turned and ran. I could hear them shouting behind me, and the sound of their boots crashing through the underbrush. I ran blindly, branches scratching my face and arms. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. I could still hear them, getting closer. Panic set in. I spotted a small cave and dove inside, pressing myself against the cold, damp wall. I held my breath as I heard them approach. They were cursing and arguing about which way I went. One of them said something about not letting me get away, that I'd seen too much. They searched for what felt like forever, but eventually, their voices faded. I stayed hidden until I was sure they were gone. My mind raced with fear. I had to get back to the cabin, but I was lost. I waited until it was completely dark, then crept out of the cave. The forest was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. I tried to use the stars to navigate, but it was no use. I was disoriented and terrified. I walked for hours, jumping at every sound. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I saw the faint glow of my cabin's lights through the trees. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards it. Inside, I locked the door and closed all the curtains. My hands were shaking as I tried to think. I needed to call for help, but there was no cell service out here. I had to wait until morning to drive to town. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made me jump. At dawn, I packed my things as quickly as I could. I got in my car and drove away, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror the whole time. The drive to town felt like it took forever, but I finally reached a place with cell service and called the authorities. I told them everything. They said they'd send someone to investigate, but I don't know if they ever did. I didn't stick around to find out. I went home and tried to put the whole thing behind me. Even now, months later, I can't shake the fear. I keep thinking about those men and their traps, and what could have happened if they caught me. I haven't gone back to the woods since, and I don't think I ever will. The peace and quiet I wanted so badly turned into a nightmare I can't forget. I was in Virginia for a project, researching old Civil War battlefields. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, just me and my camera, documenting locations for a historical book. I drove out to a spot deep in the wilderness, far from any main roads. It was peaceful, just the sounds of nature and the history I was there to capture. I parked my car on the side of a narrow dirt road and hiked in, carrying my equipment. The trees were thick, and the underbrush was dense. I followed an old, overgrown path that led to a clearing. The clearing was supposed to be a site of an old encampment. I set up my camera and started taking pictures, noting the layout of the land and imagining what it must have been like back then. After a while, I heard voices. At first, I thought maybe it was other history enthusiasts, but the tone was different. I moved closer to the sound, staying hidden behind the trees. I saw a group of men, dressed in camouflage and carrying rifles. They were gathered around a makeshift camp, talking and moving with a sense of purpose. My stomach dropped when I realized this wasn't a historical reenactment. These men were real and looked dangerous. I stayed as quiet as I could, watching them. They had maps and diagrams spread out on a table, and they were discussing plans. It was clear they were practicing for something big. I took a few steps back, trying to retreat without being noticed. That's when I stepped on a branch, the snap echoing in the still air. The men's heads snapped up, and one of them shouted. Panic set in. I turned and ran, hearing them behind me. My heart pounded as I crashed through the underbrush, branches slapping my face and arms. I didn't dare look back. I knew if they caught me, it wouldn't end well. I tripped over a root and fell hard, but scrambled to my feet, adrenaline pushing me forward. I could hear them shouting and cursing, closing in. I spotted a fallen tree with a hollow space underneath and dove in, pressing myself into the damp earth. I covered myself with leaves and tried to slow my breathing. They were so close I could hear their footsteps and see their boots through the gaps in the foliage. They searched the area, their voices angry and frustrated. One of them said they couldn't let me leave, that I knew too much. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. After what felt like an eternity, they moved on, their voices fading. I stayed hidden, too scared to move. When I was sure they were gone, I crawled out and looked around. The forest was silent again, but I knew they were still out there somewhere. I had to get back to my car. I moved as quietly as I could, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the paths. Every sound made me jump, convinced they were right behind me. I finally saw the road and my car. Relief washed over me as I sprinted the last few yards. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I drove away as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I went straight to the police station and told them everything. They took my statement and promised to investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those men would come after me. I drove back to my hotel, packed my things, and left Virginia that same night. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away. I had planned a solo hiking trip in the Canadian Rockies. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, just me and the mountains. I arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, eager to start my journey. The air was crisp, and the scenery was breathtaking. I felt a sense of freedom as I walked deeper into the wilderness. After a few hours of hiking, I found a secluded spot near a river to set up camp. The area was perfect, far from any main trails. I pitched my tent and decided to explore a bit more before settling in for the evening. The sound of the river was calming, and I felt at peace with the world. As I wandered, I noticed something odd. There were fresh tracks on the ground, not the usual animal prints I had seen before. They looked like boot prints, several of them, heading deeper into the woods. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow them. Maybe it was another hiker, I thought, but something about it felt off. The tracks led me to a small clearing where I saw a group of men. They had a makeshift camp set up and were busy with something. I moved closer, staying hidden behind the trees. My heart sank when I saw what they were doing. They had traps and cages, and it became clear they were poachers. They were dealing with animal parts, something illegal and brutal. I took a step back, trying to retreat quietly, but I stumbled on a rock. The noise made one of the men look up. Our eyes met, and his expression turned from surprise to anger. He shouted to the others, and I knew I had to run. I turned and bolted back towards my camp, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the underbrush. They were shouting, and their voices were getting closer. Panic set in, but I kept running. I reached my camp and grabbed my backpack, not bothering to pack up the tent. I had to get out of there. The trail I had come in on was the only way I knew, so I headed back that way, hoping I could lose them in the dense forest. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were on fire, but I pushed on. The men's voices were still behind me, growing louder. I came to a fork in the trail and took the path to the left, hoping it would lead me to safety. The terrain was rough, and I stumbled several times. I glanced back and saw them, closer than ever. One of them raised a rifle, and I knew I was in serious danger. I saw a rocky outcrop up ahead and made a dash for it. I climbed up, finding a small crevice to hide in. I squeezed myself into the tight space and tried to control my breathing. The men arrived at the outcrop, looking around. I could see them through a gap in the rocks. They were furious, cursing and shouting threats. One of them suggested they split up to cover more ground. My heart sank as they spread out, searching for me. I stayed as still as possible, praying they wouldn't find me. Minutes felt like hours as they scoured the area. One of them passed so close I could smell his sweat. I held my breath, terrified he'd hear me. Finally, they regrouped, frustrated. They decided to move on, thinking I had managed to get further away. I waited until their voices faded completely before crawling out of my hiding spot. My body was shaking, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed to find help, but I was deep in the wilderness with no signal on my phone. I decided to keep moving, hoping to come across another hiker or a ranger. The forest was eerily quiet now, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified they would come back. As night fell, I found a small cave to take shelter in. I was exhausted, but too scared to sleep. I sat there, clutching my backpack, listening to the sounds of the forest. I thought about my family and friends, wondering if I'd ever see them again. At dawn, I started moving again, sticking to less obvious paths. After hours of walking, I finally saw a ranger station in the distance. Relief washed over me as I ran towards it. I burst in, out of breath, and told the ranger everything. They called the authorities, and soon the area was swarming with police. They found the poachers' camp, but the men were gone. The rangers assured me they'd keep searching, but I knew those men were still out there somewhere. I left the Rockies that day, shaken but grateful to be alive. The beauty of the mountains was tainted by the terror I experienced. I had been studying wildlife in the Florida swamps for about 3 weeks. It was part of a project for my degree, and I had always loved being out in nature. The swamp was dense and full of life, but it was also easy to get lost if you weren't careful. I had a map and a GPS, though, so I felt pretty confident. One morning, I decided to explore a part of the swamp I hadn't been to yet. The sun was just coming up, and the air was thick with humidity. I packed up my gear and set out. The further I went, the quieter it got. The usual sounds of birds and insects started to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. After about an hour, I noticed something odd. There were tracks on the ground that didn't look like they belonged to any animal. They were deep and uniform, like from heavy boots. Curious, I followed them, thinking maybe I'd find another researcher or a lost hiker. The tracks led me to a small clearing. My heart sank when I saw what was there. Hidden behind some thick brush, there were several camouflage tents and crates stacked high. I moved closer, staying low, and my worst fears were confirmed. The crates were full of drugs and weapons. I had stumbled upon a drug cartel's hidden operation. Panic set in. I knew I needed to get out of there, but as I turned to leave, I heard voices. Men were coming back to the camp. I froze, my mind racing. There was no way I could outrun them if they saw me. I spotted a thick cluster of bushes and crawled into it, hoping they wouldn't notice me. From my hiding spot, I watched as 4 men walked into the clearing. They were heavily armed and looked dangerous. They started unloading more crates from a boat that was docked nearby. I tried to stay as still as possible, barely breathing, praying they wouldn't come near me. One of the men stopped suddenly and looked around, his eyes scanning the area. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud I was sure he could hear it. He said something in Spanish to the others, and they all looked tense. I knew I had to get out of there before they started searching the area. As they continued with their work, I slowly began to inch my way back, trying to put as much distance between me and them as possible. Every movement was painstakingly slow, and every rustle of leaves sounded deafening. I managed to get a few yards away before I heard a shout. They had found my footprints. I broke into a run, not caring about the noise anymore. I could hear them shouting behind me, the sound of gunfire echoing through the swamp. I didn't know if they were shooting at me or just trying to scare me, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Branches whipped at my face, and I stumbled several times, but I kept going. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I pushed on, driven by sheer terror. I couldn't let them catch me. I remembered a thick patch of mangroves I had passed earlier and headed for it, hoping it would provide some cover. I dove into the dense foliage, crawling through the mud and roots. The shouts grew fainter, but I didn't stop until I was sure I had lost them. I found a small hollow under a large tree and squeezed myself into it, trying to calm my breathing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, listening for any signs of the men. The swamp had returned to its usual symphony of sounds, but I couldn't relax. I knew they were still out there, looking for me. When night fell, I decided to move again, hoping the darkness would help cover my escape. I navigated by the stars, heading towards what I hoped was the direction of the main road. Every sound made me jump, every shadow looked like one of the men. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw the lights of a small town in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down yet. I made my way to the nearest building, a rundown gas station, and stumbled inside. The clerk looked at me in shock as I gasped out a request for help. The police arrived quickly, and I told them everything. They organized a search of the area, but by the time they got to the clearing, the men were gone, and so were the drugs and weapons. They assured me they'd keep investigating, but I knew it was unlikely they'd find anything. I left Florida the next day, still shaken by what had happened. The swamp, once a place of beauty and wonder, now held a sinister memory. We decided to go camping in the Texas Hill Country. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway for me and my friends, just a break from our busy lives. We found a spot by the river, secluded and peaceful. It seemed perfect. The first night was calm. We set up our tents, made a fire, and enjoyed the quiet. The stars were bright, and the sound of the river was soothing. We stayed up late, talking and laughing. There was no sign of trouble. The next day, we explored the area. The hill country was beautiful, with rolling hills and dense forests. We hiked, took photos, and swam in the river. Everything was going great until we returned to our campsite that evening. As we approached, we noticed something was off. Our tents were slashed, our food scattered, and our belongings thrown around. At first, we thought it might have been an animal, but then we saw the message. Spray painted on a rock near our campsite with the words, "Go home." We were shaken but decided it was probably just a prank. We cleaned up the mess and decided to stay one more night. After all, we had traveled a long way, and it didn't seem right to leave because of a few vandals. That night, we built another fire and tried to relax. But the atmosphere had changed. The woods felt different, more threatening. We were on edge, jumping at every sound. Around midnight, we heard voices. At first, it was just a murmur, but it grew louder. There were people out there, just beyond the light of our fire. We couldn't see them, but we knew they were watching us. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. There was no answer, just a low, menacing laugh. My friends and I huddled closer together, fear gripping us. The voices continued, taunting us, making crude jokes about what they were going to do to us. We decided it was time to leave. We packed up as quickly as we could, but it was hard to see in the dark, and we were fumbling with our gear. Just as we were about to leave, one of the men stepped into the light. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a mean look in his eyes. "You folks lost?" he asked, a cruel smile on his face. "We're just leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Good idea," he said. "This ain't a place for outsiders." More men appeared, surrounding us. They were all armed, carrying rifles and shotguns. We were trapped. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my friends were silent with fear. "Let's go," I said, trying to keep calm. We started walking, but the men followed us, laughing and making threats. They fired their guns into the air, the sound echoing through the woods. We broke into a run, terror driving us forward. We stumbled through the dark, the men close behind. They seemed to know the area well, while we were tripping over roots and branches. My friend Sarah fell, twisting her ankle. I helped her up, but she could barely walk. "We can't outrun them," she said, tears in her eyes. "We have to try," I said, desperation in my voice. We could hear the men getting closer, their laughter ringing in our ears. We were running out of options. Suddenly, we saw a light in the distance. A cabin, or maybe a house. It was our only hope. We made a dash for it, praying that someone inside would help us. As we got closer, we saw that it was indeed a small cabin. I banged on the door, shouting for help. An old man opened the door, looking confused and alarmed. "What the hell's going on?" he asked. "Please, help us," I begged. "They're trying to kill us." He looked past us and saw the men approaching. "Get inside," he said, stepping aside to let us in. We rushed inside, and he slammed the door shut, locking it. The men outside banged on the door, shouting and cursing. The old man grabbed a shotgun from the corner and pointed it at the door. "Stay back," he shouted. "This is private property." There was a tense silence, and then the men outside started to back off. "We'll be back," one of them shouted. "And you better not be here when we do." We stayed in the cabin for the rest of the night, too scared to leave. The old man, whose name was Jack, told us we were lucky to have found him. He said the locals didn't like outsiders, especially not ones camping on their land. The next morning, Jack drove us back to town. We thanked him profusely, grateful to be alive. We reported the incident to the local sheriff, but he didn't seem too interested. "Best you don't come back here," he said. "Some folks around here don't take kindly to strangers." We left Texas that day, shaken and scarred by the experience. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't found Jack's cabin, and I don't want to think about it. We decided to go camping deep in the forests of Pennsylvania, my brother and I. It was supposed to be a bonding trip, just the two of us reconnecting with nature like we used to when we were kids. We found a secluded spot near a stream, surrounded by tall trees and the sounds of wildlife. It felt peaceful at first. The first night went by without incident. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and cooked dinner over a campfire. We reminisced about our childhood adventures, laughing and enjoying each other's company. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was crisp and cool. On the second day, things started to feel off. We noticed strange noises coming from the woods around us, rustling of leaves and snapping twigs. At first, we brushed it off as animals or maybe just our imaginations playing tricks on us. As dusk approached, we decided to go for a short hike to explore the area. That's when we saw him. A man, dirty and unkempt, watching us from a distance. He disappeared into the trees before we could get a good look at him, but the chill that ran down my spine told me something wasn't right. We hurried back to our campsite, unnerved by the encounter. We didn't mention it to each other, but I knew my brother felt it too, the sense of being watched. We tried to calm ourselves down, telling each other it was probably just another camper or a hiker passing through. That night, we heard footsteps outside our tents. Slow, deliberate footsteps that circled around us. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, trying to gauge how many there were and where they were coming from. My brother gripped his flashlight tightly, ready to defend ourselves if necessary. Suddenly, a voice pierced the darkness. "Hey there," it called out, low and menacing. "Mind if I join you, fellas?" It was him, the man we had seen earlier. He emerged from the shadows, holding a knife in his hand. He was dirty, with wild eyes that seemed to glint in the firelight. My brother and I froze, fear paralyzing us. "What do you want?" my brother managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. The man grinned, a sinister smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Just looking for some company," he said. "You boys look like you could use some." He took a step closer, and I could see the crazed look in his eyes. We were trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help us. I glanced at my brother, silently communicating our next move. We had to get out of there, but we had to do it carefully. "Sorry, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just about to turn in for the night. Maybe another time." The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of anger. "I ain't asking," he growled. "I'm telling you." Before he could make another move, my brother lunged forward, swinging his flashlight like a weapon. It connected with the man's arm, causing him to drop the knife with a yelp of pain. We didn't hesitate. We bolted from our tents, running blindly through the trees. I could hear the man shouting behind us, cursing and threatening to kill us. We ran as fast as we could, branches scraping against our faces, roots tripping us up. Adrenaline fueled our escape, but I knew we couldn't keep this pace forever. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station several miles away. We burst through the doors, breathless and covered in sweat and dirt. The rangers were alarmed by our appearance, but we managed to explain what had happened between gasps for air. They called the police immediately and organized a search party to comb the area for the man. We gave them a description, though I doubted he would be easy to find in the dense forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching us, waiting for another chance to strike. The police took our statements and assured us they would do everything they could to find the man. They advised us to stay at the ranger station for the night, or we would be safe under their watchful eye. We gladly accepted, too shaken to even think about returning to our campsite. It took hours for us to calm down enough to sleep, even with the rangers around us. Every rustle of leaves outside made us jump, every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. I kept replaying the man's crazed expression in my mind, wondering what would have happened if my brother hadn't acted so quickly. The next morning, the police informed us that they hadn't found any trace of the man. They assured us they would continue searching, but I knew it was unlikely they would catch him. The forest was vast, and he knew how to hide. We packed up our belongings, grateful to be leaving the area. The rangers escorted us back to our car, and we drove away from the Pennsylvania forest, our hearts still pounding with fear. We didn't speak much on the drive home, both lost in our thoughts about what had happened and what could have been. I don't know if we'll ever go camping again after this. The experience has left a lasting scar on both of us, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in the wilderness. I keep replaying that night in my mind, wondering what might have happened if we hadn't been able to escape. I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of Tennessee, seeking some solitude away from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to reconnect with nature and clear my mind. I found a secluded spot near a small creek, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of wildlife. The first day passed without incident. I set up my tent, arranged my gear, and built a small campfire to cook dinner. The evening was serene, with the crackling fire and the stars twinkling overhead. I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I sat by the fire, enjoying the solitude. But as the night crept in, things started to feel off. I noticed subtle changes around my campsite. Small items moved, my gear seemed slightly rearranged. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, or perhaps the wind playing tricks. But then I found something that sent a chill down my spine, a piece of paper with a crude drawing of a skull and crossbones, left near my tent. I scanned the area, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. Fear began to gnaw at me as I realized someone had been in my campsite while I was away. I decided to stay awake that night, my senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig or distant rustle made my heart race. I kept my flashlight close, casting nervous glances into the darkness beyond the edge of my campsite. I knew I had to be prepared in case whoever was out there decided to come back. The hours dragged on, and fatigue started to creep in despite my efforts to stay vigilant. Just as I was beginning to think I might have overreacted, I heard footsteps approaching. Quiet, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. The footsteps paused near the edge of the clearing, then resumed, moving closer to my tent. Panic gripped me as I realized someone was standing just outside, observing me in the darkness. I held my breath, afraid to make a sound. A shadow moved across the fabric of my tent, and I could sense someone lingering just beyond the thin barrier. I reached for my phone, ready to call for help, but hesitated. What if they heard me? Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, low and menacing. "I know you're in there," it whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't be here." I remained frozen, unsure of what to do. The voice was unfamiliar, filled with hostility and malice. I strained to see through the fabric of the tent, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. The person outside seemed to grow impatient. "Come out," they demanded, their voice growing louder. I said, "Come out." I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent and peered outside. Standing before me was a figure cloaked in darkness, their features obscured. They held something in their hand, a knife, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Fear gripped me like a vice as I realized the danger I was in. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing with adrenaline-fueled thoughts of escape. Without a second thought, I bolted into the forest, branches scraping against my arms and legs as I ran blindly through the underbrush. Behind me, I heard the person giving chase. Their footsteps pounded on the forest floor, closing the distance between us. I pushed myself harder, desperate to put more distance between myself and my pursuer. Fear and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, but I knew I had to keep going. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic surged through me as I realized I was completely at the mercy of the forest. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind me, growing closer with each passing moment. I spotted a narrow trail ahead and veered onto it, hoping it would lead me to safety. My legs burned with exertion, and my lungs ached from the effort of running. I glanced over my shoulder, catching a glimpse of the figure still following me. They were relentless, their determination palpable even from a distance. I pushed myself harder, driven by sheer terror and the instinct to survive. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging welts in their wake. I could feel the person gaining on me, their presence a looming threat in the darkness. Just as I felt myself reaching the limits of my endurance, I burst into a small clearing. Ahead of me, I saw the faint glow of lights, a road. Relief flooded through me as I realized I had stumbled upon a hiking trail. Without hesitation, I sprinted toward it, my legs propelling me forward with renewed energy. I burst out onto the road, panting and covered in sweat and dirt. A car approached from the distance, its headlights cutting through the night. I waved frantically, hoping they would see me and stop. The driver slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just a few feet away. I stumbled toward the car, babbling incoherently about someone chasing me in the woods. The driver, a middle-aged man with a concerned expression, helped me into the passenger seat and quickly drove away from the forest. He called the police as he drove, relaying my frantic account of what had happened. I struggled to catch my breath, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The man assured me everything would be okay, but I couldn't shake the fear that the person from the forest would find me again. The police met us at a nearby ranger station. They took my statement, and I described the person who had chased me as best as I could. They assured me they would search the area thoroughly, but I knew the chances of finding the individual in the vast wilderness were slim. They drove me to a nearby town where I could rest and recover from the ordeal. I stayed in a motel that night, my mind racing with what-ifs and terrifying scenarios. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the relative safety of the motel room. The next day, the police informed me they hadn't found any trace of the person who had chased me. They promised to continue their search, but I knew deep down it was unlikely they would catch them. The forest was vast and unforgiving, a perfect hiding place for someone intent on staying hidden. I returned home, haunted by the events of that night. The tranquility of nature had been shattered by a terrifying encounter that left me shaken to the core. I couldn't bring myself to go camping alone again, the fear of the unknown too overwhelming to ignore. I shared my story online, hoping to warn others of the dangers that could lurk in even the most peaceful of settings. I urged everyone to be vigilant and cautious when venturing into the wilderness alone, emphasizing the importance of safety and preparedness. Months passed, but the memory of that night remained vivid in my mind. I couldn't forget the feeling of being hunted, the terror of knowing someone wanted to harm me. It changed me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. I sought therapy to help me cope with the trauma, to make sense of what had happened and find a way to move forward. Slowly, with time and support, I began to heal. But the scars of that night would always be a part of me,